The snow fell like ghostly feathers across the high plains of Wyoming territory, coating the land in silence and white fire. The wind howled against the desolate horizon, curling round the skeletal remains of cottonwood trees and the worn fence posts that led to a lonely cabin tucked between two frozen ridges. Inside, a dim glow from an oil lamp flickered across for weary faces to couples, drawn together by fate, sheltering from a storm that seemed to have no end. Elias Boone, a rugged rancher with shoulders like carved oak, and eyes that carried the weight of many winters, sat sharpening his bowie knife beside the fire. His wife, Clara, slender and strong-willed, tended to the kettle of stew simmering over the flames, her golden hair tied in a loose braid that shimmered like wheat under lamplight. Across from them sat James and Leela, cotton newlyweds on their way westward before the blizzard caught them by surprise. James, young but stubborn, clutched his rifle across his knees, his jaw tense with the strain of a man trying to protect what little he had left. Leela's cheeks were pale from the cold, her gloved hands clasped round a tin cup as if to hold on to warmth, to life, to the fragile hope that tomorrow the storm might break. The cabin creaked as the wind clawed at its walls, but inside, the four found fragile safety in shared silence. Each had a past that weighed heavy on their hearts. Elias and Clara burdened by years of struggle and loss. James and Leela still learning what it meant to love through hardship. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the dim air. And for a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the room, the old and the young. Two couples bound by circumstance yet separated by time. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing. But within those timber walls, another kind of storm brewed, one of buried fears, unspoken words, and the quiet yearning for connection in a world that had grown too cold for comfort. The storm didn't let up come dawn. Instead, it grew worse. A white curtain swallowing the mountains and trapping the cabin in a world of endless frost. Elias rose before the others, his breath clouding in the frigid air as he pulled on his fur coat and stepped to the window. Beyond the frosted glass, the prairie was gone, just a swirling mass of snow that devoured sound and sight. "Ain't no way we're moving today," he muttered, half to himself. Behind him, Clara stood, rubbing her eyes and wrapping a shawl round her shoulders. "You'll freeze before you take 3 steps out there," she said, her voice soft but edged, with the knowing tone of a woman who'd seen too many winters take too many men. James and Leela woke soon after, huddled together under the heavy buffalo hide Elias had loaned them. James, restless and proud, bristled at the thought of being trapped. "We can't just sit here," he said, glancing toward the door as though sheer will could part the storm. "We've got supplies running low. My mare's out there, tied up by the shed." Elias turned, his expression calm but hard. "You go out there now, boy. You won't make it 10 feet for the wind cuts you clean in half." The young man fell silent, chastened but not defeated. Clara handed him a bowl of stew. "Eat," she said kindly. "There's no shame in waiting out a storm." Leela reached for his hand, her eyes pleading for patience. Elias watched them quietly, the way James's fingers trembled not from cold but from pride. The same pride he'd once carried, when he was young and foolish and thought he could fight the land itself. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, time slowed. They passed the hours with stories. Elias spoke of his youth as a cattle driver, of gunfights and long trails under burning suns. Clara told of the night she'd nursed a wounded outlaw who'd repaid her kindness by riding away before dawn. James and Leela shared their dream of heading west to Oregon, to a patch of land where no one knew their names. In the flicker of the fire, laughter came easily for the first time since the storm began. For a few precious hours, they were not survivors, they were just people, chasing the warmth of each other's company against the merciless cold. But as dusk fell and the wind took on a hollow, mournful tone, Elias's eyes drifted to the door again. Something in that sound, deep, distant, and almost human, set his gut twisting. He rose slowly, listening. Clara noticed the change in his face. "What is it?" she whispered. Elias's hand went to his rifle. "That ain't the wind," he said. The noise came again. Faint but unmistakable, a low, wavering cry carried on the wind. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, it rose and fell like the moan of a lost soul, half human, half wild, echoing through the snow as if the blizzard itself were haunted. Elias set his rifle down gently, crossed to the door, and unlatched it just enough to peer into the storm. The wind howled in instantly, whipping the fire and filling the room with icy breath. Clara grabbed her shawl tighter. "Elias, shut that door," she hissed. But he didn't move. He stood still, his eyes narrowing into the white void. "There's something out there," he said. James rose from his seat, restless energy in every motion. "Could be a man," he said, already pulling on his coat. "Or an animal," Clara countered sharply, her voice trembling just slightly. "You don't go chasing ghosts in weather like this." Elias ignored them both and stepped outside, boots sinking deep into the drifts. James followed, his younger pride refusing to stay behind. The cold hit like a wall sharp, blinding, endless. They could barely see a few feet ahead, snow biting their faces, wind tearing at their coats. "You hear that?" Elias shouted over the storm. James nodded, his breath visible in bursts. Then, through the blur of white, a shape appeared, dark, slumped, barely moving. Then James lunged forward, stumbling to his knees beside it. It was a man, or what was left of one. Frost rimed his beard and lashes. His skin was the color of death. But when Elias knelt beside him, the man's eyes flickered open, glassy and wild. "Please," he rasped. Elias and James dragged him back through the snow, fighting the wind every step. Clara and Leela gasped when they burst inside, hauling the stranger to the floor by the fire. His face was gaunt, his lips blue, but his hands clutched something tight, a blood-stained pouch made of deerskin. Clara knelt beside him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man's gaze darted between them, unfocused, desperate. "They're Coleman," he croaked. "Bandits, 3 of them. Took my horse, left me for dead." His words trailed off as his body shuddered. Elias leaned closer. "Bandits," he repeated. The man nodded weakly, coughing. "Ridden this way. Followed my tracks. They won't stop till they find me." Then his eyes rolled back, and he went still. Leela covered her mouth, trembling. James swore softly under his breath. Elias's jaw tightened. "We'll need to be ready," he said. "If what he says is true. Those men'll hit before morning." The storm battered the windows as if to echo his words. Clara looked toward the unconscious stranger, then at her husband, Elias. "We can't fight in this weather." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "We ain't got a choice." Night swallowed the plains in a storm of white fury. The wind screamed through the chinks in the cabin walls like 1,000 ghostly riders, and the snow beat against the windows in relentless waves. Inside, the flicker of the oil lamp threw trembling shadows across the room, catching on the rifles propped against the hearth and the tense faces of those who waited. Elias moved with slow precision, checking each bullet, each cartridge, as though ritual alone could steady his heart. James stood by the door, eyes darting toward the window where nothing could be seen but the swirling chaos outside. "You really think they'll come in this weather?" he asked. Elias nodded once. "Men like that don't fear the cold. Not when there's blood or gold." At the end of it, the unconscious stranger lay near the fire, his breathing shallow but steady. That deerskin pouch still rested by his side, and though none had dared open it, all of them felt its weight, not in gold perhaps, but in trouble. Clara tended to the stew again, her hands shaking only slightly as she ladled it into tin bowls. "You two eat," she said, her voice firm. "You'll need strength if they come." Leela tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Maybe he was wrong, she whispered, glancing at the man. Maybe they turned back. Elias looked at her with eyes that had long forgotten the luxury of hope. In the West, he said softly, trouble always finds its way home outside. Something cracked, not thunder, not wind, but the sharp, deliberate sound of a branch snapping under weight. James spun, rifle raised. Elias motioned him to stay calm, then crossed silently to the window. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the wall of snow, 3 vague figures emerged, dark, hunched shapes moving slowly but steadily toward the cabin. "They're here," Elias muttered. The room froze. Leela clutched James's arm, eyes wide. "What do we do?" He looked to Elias, but the older man already had his answer. "We stand our ground," he said. "Clara, douse the lamp." The cabin fell into near darkness, lit only by the dull glow of the embers. The sound of footsteps grew nearer. Crunching snow, the faint jingle of spurs, the murmur of voices carried by the wind. A knock came then, soft, mocking, deliberate. "Open up, friends," a voice drawled, low and smooth as whiskey. "We ain't here to cause trouble, just looking for a warm fire." Elias exchanged a glance with James. Then he called back, his tone cold as the snow outside. "Ain't no room here." The voice chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "That's so. Shame. We saw smoke. Figured maybe you had something worth sharing." A pause. "Then, maybe we'll come see for ourselves." The hand rattled. Elias raised his rifle. "James," he said quietly, "when I fire, you take the left window." James nodded, his pulse hammering in his ears. The world held still one last moment. Then the door shuddered under the first blow. The first blow against the door was like thunder. The wood groaned, hinges screaming as snow burst through the cracks. Elias steadied his rifle, his breath fogging in the dim air. "Now," he barked. The gunshot split the night, echoing off the frozen hills. The flash from the muzzle lit the room in brief, violent bursts. James fired through the window, the glass shattering outward in a spray of frost and flame. Screams rose outside. One of the bandits had gone down, a dark shape thrashing in the snow, but the others kept coming. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, splintering wood, sending sparks flying from the hearth. Leela crouched behind the table, clutching her hands over her ears. Clara knelt beside her, calm despite the chaos, reloading Elias's rifle with practiced hands. She'd seen gunfights before, years ago, when bandits had come for their cattle and Elias had stood alone against them. She'd buried 2 brothers that night, and her heart had turned to iron. Now, as snow and gunfire roared to get outside, she felt the same old fire rise within her chest. Elias fired again, the recoil driving into his shoulder. "James, right side," he shouted. James moved to cover the window, firing in controlled bursts, his youthful fear burned away by raw instinct. Outside, shadows flitted through the storm, men with scarves pulled high over their faces, moving like wolves through the drifts. "They're circling," James yelled. Elias cursed under his breath. "They'll try the back." He spun toward Clara, by the kitchen door. She obeyed without hesitation, dragging a heavy trunk against the frame. The wind howled louder, and then a window shattered behind her. A gloved hand reached through, grabbing her shawl. She screamed, twisting free as Elias fired again. The man fell backward into the snow, a crimson bloom spreading across the white. Silence followed, broken only by the roar of the storm. For a moment, it seemed over. James's chest heaved, his rifle smoking. "Think that's all of them?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "No, wolves don't stop till they're sure you're dead," as if to prove him right. A faint laugh came from outside, slow, cruel, deliberate. "You're a hell of a shot, old man," the voice drawled. "But you can't hide in there forever." Elias stepped closer to the door. His eyes narrow. "Ain't hidin'," he said. "Just waitin' for you to do something stupid." The reply came in the form of fire, a burning torch hurled through the broken window. It rolled across the floor, igniting the rug. Clara grabbed a blanket, smothering the flames while Elias kicked the torch aside. Smoke filled the room, stinging their eyes. James reloaded, jaw tight. "We can't stay in here," he shouted. Elias nodded grimly. "Then we take the fight to him." He slung his rifle over his shoulder and opened the door again to the raging white beyond. Snow whipped at his face as he stepped out, boots crunching. "Stay behind me," he ordered. James followed, heart pounding. Behind them, Clara whispered a prayer, clutching Lila's hand. Outside, 3 dark shapes moved through the snow to upright, one dragging a wounded leg, and the night was far from done bleeding. The storm clawed at them the moment they stepped outside, a living beast of wind and snow that bit through coats and skin alike. Elias lowered his head brim against the onslaught, rifle ready. Eyes narrowed to slits as he scanned the white void ahead. The night was a blur of motion and sound. The hiss of snow, the crack of gunfire, the echo of shouts carried by the wind. James followed close behind, his boots sinking deep into the drifts. He'd never known cold like this, never felt fear crawl up his spine the way it did now. Yet he held tight to the rifle and to the memory of Lila's trembling hands. "Where are they?" he shouted over the wind. Elias didn't answer. He moved with a predator's patience, listening more than seeing, guided by instinct honed from your surviving the unforgiving frontier. Then, to their left, came the faint crunch of footsteps. Elias dropped to one and fired. The flash lit the night, revealing a shadow toppling into the snow. Another shape lunged from the right, gun blazing. James Dove, rolling his bullets, kicked up white powder round him. He fired back, once, twice, and a dark figure fell silent against the drifts. The wind screamed louder, carrying the scent of gunpowder and blood. "Two down," James shouted. "Where's the third?" Elias turned, scanning the chaos. Then came the answer, a low growl, close behind. He spun, barely ducking as a shot whistled past his head. The last bandit was closer than he'd thought, creeping in from behind a ridge. Elias fired once, missed, and felt the burn of lead graze his shoulder. Pain flared hot, but he didn't falter. "Stay down, boy," he barked. James dropped, reloading as fast as his shaking hands allowed. The bandit laughed, a cruel, broken sound. "Old man," he called through the wind, "you should have stayed in your hole." He stepped into view, tall, scarred, with eyes that gleamed like ice in the firelight. He raised his revolver, steady, confident. Elias met his gaze, the weight of decades behind that stare. "Maybe so," he said softly, and fired. The report echoed across the plain, swallowed by the storm. The bandit staggered, gun falling from his grasp, before collapsing into the snow. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Elias lowered his rifle, breath ragged, blood seeping through his coat. James ran to him, grabbing his arm. "You're it." Elias winced but waved him off. Just a graze, together. They stood in the swirling snow, staring at the still forms scattered round them. The storm began to ease, the wind slowing to a whisper as dawn's first grey light broke across the horizon. "It's over," James murmured. Elias looked toward the faint glow rising behind the hills. For now. He turned back toward the cabin, where smoke still curled faintly from the chimney. "Let's go home, son." The word slipped out, "son," and though James noticed it, neither spoke of it. They trudged back through the snow in silence, side by side, 2 generations bound not by blood but by the fire of survival. Behind them, the snow began to cover the fallen, erasing the scars of the night as the world turned white once more. When Elias and James finally pushed through the cabin door, the warmth of the fire hit them like a memory of life itself. Clara and Lila rushed forward, eyes wide with fear and relief tangled together. "Elias," Clara cried, reaching for him as he stumbled in, the sleeve of his coat dark with blood. "It's nothing," he said gruffly, though his face was pale beneath the brim of his hat. Lila turned toward James, her hands trembling as she touched his cheek. "You're safe," she whispered. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries exhaustion more than joy. "We both are." Clara tore a strip from a blanket and pressed it against Elias's shoulder, her movements steady, practiced, filled with the quiet determination of a woman who'd patched him up more times than she could count. Outside, the storm began to calm, though the wind still sighed through the cracks like a restless ghost. The air inside was thick with smoke, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood. The stranger they'd rescued still lay near the hearth, motionless but breathing. James crouched beside him, curiosity flickering through the fatigue. "We fought for a man we don't even know," he murmured. Elias nodded slowly. "That's the way of it. Sometimes out here, a man's life ain't his own. It's tied to whoever happens by." Clara tied off the bandage and sat back, her hands shaking now that the worst had passed. "What'll we do with him when he wakes?" she asked. "He brought death to our door." Elias's eyes hardened, shadowed by the firelight. "We'll find out what's worth killing for." The hours crept by, the storm outside fading into a soft, steady snowfall. The cabin felt smaller now, crowded with too much silence. Lila sat near the fire, her eyes distant, watching the flames lick at the logs. James rested beside her, one arm round her shoulders. "I thought we were done for," she said quietly. "I thought we'd die out there, and no one would ever know our names." James squeezed her hand. "We made it. That's what matters." Across the room, Elias and Clara exchanged a look, the kind shared only by those who've seen too much and know how fragile survival truly is. Then the stranger stirred. A low groan escaped his lips, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze, then fear. You saved me," he rasped. Elias crouched beside him. "You got a name." "Harlan," the man whispered. "Harlan Finch. You said those men were after you." Elias said. "Why?" Harlan hesitated, eyes flicking to the deerskin pouch still lying near the fire. "Because of that," he breathed. James picked it up, feeling its weight. "Gold," he guessed. Harlan shook his head weakly. "Worse," he coughed, pain twisting his face. "Something men'll kill for. But it ain't gold." Elias's gaze darkened. "Then what is it?" The man's lips parted as if to answer, but before he could speak, the wind outside rose again, and from the distance came the faint echo of hooves on snow. The sound of hooves was faint but unmistakable, rhythmic, deliberate, cutting through the hush of the dying storm like a drumbeat of doom. Everyone in the cabin froze. Clara's hand went to her mouth, and Lila's fingers tightened round James's arm. Elias rose slowly, wincing at the pull in his shoulder, and strode to the window. He wiped a clear circle in the frost with the back of his hand, and peered into the grey dawn. The snow had thinned enough to see the outline of the ridge, and along it, black shapes moved against the pale horizon. "Riders," he said grimly. "More of them." James swore under his breath. "How many?" "Hard to tell. 3. Maybe 4. Harlan coughed, struggling to sit up. "They're the rest of them," he rasped. "Didn't think they'd find me this fast." Elias turned, his tone sharp as a blade. "You best tell us what's in that pouch, before more blood gets spilled over it." Harlan's eyes darted to the pouch again, then to the faces watching him. "It's a map," he said finally, "to an old Union payroll. $50,000 in gold buried up near. Devil's spine. Silence fell like a curtain. James blinked. Gold. Elias's jaw tightened. That's enough to drive men mad. Harlan nodded weakly. We found it by chance. Me and those three. But greed don't share easy. They tried to kill me for it. Clara's eyes flickered toward the window. And now they'll kill us too. The tension in the room thickened like smoke. Elias paced, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. We can't fight another battle like last night. Not with you half dead and my shoulder shot through. Then what? James asked. We run. Elias stopped, his eyes narrowing as the faint jingle of harness and the snort of horses grew closer. We move smart. Storms eased. We've got cover in the trees down by the creek. He turned too. Clara, pack what we can carry. She nodded. Moving fast, gathering food, ammunition and blankets. Leela helped, though her hands shook. Where will we go? She asked. Elias glanced toward the mountains. There's an old line shack a few miles north. If we make it there, we can hole up till the snow buries our tracks. Harlan tried to stand, but nearly fell. James caught him under the arm. Easy, he said. You're lucky we ain't left you for the crows. Harlan managed a bitter smile. You still might. They doused the fire, throwing the cabin into chilliness. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder. Elias loaded his rifle, the click echoing like thunder in the silence. When I opened that door, we move fast, he said. Stay close, keep low, and don't stop till you hit the trees. Clara met his gaze, her eyes shining with fierce devotion. I'll be right behind you. He nodded once. No more words were needed. The door creaked open, and a rush of cold air swept in, carrying the smell of pine and blood. Beyond the ridge, the riders' voices carried on the wind. The world beyond the cabin was a wilderness of white silence and danger. Snow crunched underfoot, each step loud enough to betray them to the wind. Elias led the way down the slope, his breath clouding in the pale light of dawn. Rifle clutched tight in his good hand. Behind him, Clara followed close, her eyes scanning the trees for movement. James half-supported Harlan, who stumbled and muttered curses under his breath, the deerskin pouch tied to his belt like a curse he couldn't shake. Leela brought up the rear, her skirts soaked and her face flushed from the cold. But she didn't falter. The forest swallowed them quickly, thick pines rising like dark sentinels round a narrow creek bed half buried in snow. Keep low, Elias whispered, his voice barely carrying above the wind. If we stay in the trees, maybe they'll ride past for a few precious moments. Only the whisper of snowflakes and the creak of saddles echoed in the distance. Then, from far behind, came the shout of a man. Tracks, they went this way. The spell shattered. Elias swore under his breath. Move. They broke into a run, or as close to one as the deep snow allowed. Branches whipped at their faces. Ice cracked underfoot. The sound of hooves thundered closer, echoing between the trees. James glanced over his shoulder and saw dark shapes moving fast down the ridge. They're gaining, he shouted. Elias turned sharply toward a rocky outcrop ahead. Up there, they climbed, slipping and scrambling, the cold biting deep into their lungs. At the top, the land opened to a narrow plateau overlooking the frozen valley below. They ducked behind boulders, gasping for breath. Elias peered through the trees. For riders, he said quietly, aren't angry and stupid enough to die trying. James raised his rifle beside him. Then let's oblige him. Elias smiled faintly, though pain shadowed his features. You got grit, boy. Down below, the riders slowed, scanning the woods. One dismounted, crouching to study the tracks. The others fanned out, their horses snorting clouds into the frigid air. They'll find us, Clara whispered. Not if we make him look the wrong way, Elias said. He grabbed a stick from the ground, wrapping one end in a strip of torn cloth. James, Take Lila and circle wide toward the creek. Leave tracks that lead north. James frowned. And you? I'll draw their eyes south. They follow me. You get the women clear. Clara stepped forward, eyes flashing. You're not leaving me again. Elias met her gaze. The kind of look that spoke more than words ever could. I ain't leaving you, he said softly. Just buying us time. She hesitated, then nodded, her jaw set with steel. He lit the cloth with a match, the flame small but fierce against the wind. Go, he said. I'll find you. James took Lila's hand, pulling her toward the trees. Clara lingered only a heartbeat longer before following. The burning torch asked through the air and landed in the snow with a hiss, sending up a plume of steam and smoke that twisted in the cold dawn light. Elias crouched low behind the rocks, watching as the riders caught sight of the flicker. There, one of them shouted, pointing toward the ridge. They spurred their horses forward, snow spraying beneath hooves, their gun barrels glinting dully in the pale sun. Elias breathed deep, the kind of slow, steady breath that a man takes when he's long accepted that life might be measured in heartbeats. He raised his rifle, sighted the lead rider, and fired. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing down the valley. One rider tumbled from his horse, rolling through the snow. The others fired back, bullets whining past Elias's head. He moved quick, shifting between cover, returning fire with calm precision born of too many years fighting men just like them. Men who took what they wanted and called it living. His shoulder burned, blood seeping warm beneath his coat. But he didn't stop. Come on, you bastards, he muttered. Come and take it. Down below, James heard the echo of the shots and turned sharply. He's drawing them off, he said, having awe, having grief. Clara's hand tightened round Lila's arm. We can't leave him, she whispered. But Lila shook her head. He told us to run. Her voice broke. We have to trust him. James hesitated, torn between the man who'd saved him and the woman he loved trembling beside him. Then he made his choice. Clara, he said, meeting her eyes. Get Lila to the creek. I'll go back. You'll die. She cried. Not if I'm quick. He broke from cover before she could stop him, sprinting through the snow toward the sound of gunfire. The cold stabbed at his lungs, the wind tearing at his coat. But he didn't slow. Ahead, he saw Elias duck behind a rock, firing one last shot before a bullet struck him in the leg, sending him sprawling. Elias, James shouted. The bandits turned at the sound, guns swinging toward him. But that heartbeat of distraction was all Elias needed. He rolled to one knee and fired twice. The nearest rider dropped, his horse bolting into the trees. The last bandit cursed and turned to flee, vanishing into the snow. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. James reached Elias and helped him to his feet. You're a damn fool, boy, Elias grunted, wincing. You're welcome, James said, grinning despite the blood on his face. Together they limped down toward the creek, where Clara and Lila waited in the shelter of the pines. When the two men emerged from the snow, the women ran to them, laughter and tears mingling in their voices. You're alive, Clara breathed, clutching Elias's face in her hands. Barely, he muttered, though the warmth in his eyes betrayed him. Lila pressed herself into James's arms, her heart hammering against his chest. The four stood there for a long moment, the sun breaking through the thinning clouds, casting gold over the endless white. Behind them, the snow began to fall again, gentle now, cleansing. What about the gold? James asked quietly. Elias looked toward the deerskin pouch still hanging from Harlan's saddle. Abandoned near the ridge. Let it stay buried, he said. Some things ain't meant to be found. They turned north, toward the distant line shack, and whatever waited beyond the horizon. The storm had taken much, but it had left them something rarer, a bond forged in fire and frost. And as they disappeared into the snow, for silhouettes against the rising sun, the west lay quiet once more, vast, cold, and eternal, keeping its secrets beneath the white. The